Thanks so much for watching, listening. Totally stoked to have you here. Of course, I want you to subscribe, because why not? I have no idea why you wouldn't subscribe. This is amazing content. And, hello, how about a fantastic joke? I know you're going to settle for not fantastic. So here's your joke for today. How do fish get high? They seaweed. Seaweed fish, get it? People in the room are groaning with you, so I get it. Hey, we're starting a new series. I call this the trauma drama. You're like, what's that all about? Well, trauma. If you think about trauma, it's kind of a big deal in the world that we live in. And it's become increasingly a big deal because psychology has looked at effects of stuff, bad things that happen to us, and kind of the ripples of that. And it's interesting that Jesus actually spoke about trauma. Literally, the Greek word comes from trauma, is a Greek word. And it's interesting because we read about it in the book of Luke in a parable that Jesus was giving. And so, trauma, have you ever experienced trauma? Answer that. Put that in the comments now. What's trauma? And what's a recent trauma that you've had? And trauma can be anything from, people struggle when they're on an airplane and there's turbulence. That can be traumatic for people. Some people have trauma from a car accident. Some people have trauma from an exchange with somebody. Some trauma can be results from a rape or a physical assault. Trauma can be neglect. Trauma can be when there's abandonment or somebody leaves. All kinds of things that go associated with trauma. And I like that Jesus spoke to trauma and he addressed it in a parable, but it was the parable that Jesus gave was an answer to a question, because the whole idea of trauma, the whole experience of it, came from discussion between Jesus and a religious leader. You read about this in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 29, this conversation. And in this conversation, a religious leader comes to Jesus and says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, how do you read? How do you read the law? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, fantastic, you just did the right answer. And then it says, the Pharisee, religious leader, trying to justify himself, he asks, who is my neighbor? And that's the launching pad for the parable that Jesus gives, where trauma is the central experience around which everything kind of circles out from that. And so I think it's interesting that this whole parable, the Good Samaritan parable, is an answer to a question from the dialogue, conversation, discussion between Jesus and a religious leader. And at the end of the day, the religious leader was trying to justify himself. Who's my neighbor? And I think that's important for us, because I think sometimes if we do a lot of religion, and I'm speaking from my own experience, my own background. I grew up in church. I'm a pastor's kid, slept under the pews. I don't know how many times. I mean, the first 6 months of my life, I lived in the church basement because they were building our house. So if anybody has religious background, it's me. That was the air I breathed, literally, for a lot of my upbringing. And so I can have, in my own mind, I can have my own sense of justifying and using religion to justify, to tweak, to accommodate, to make an excuse or reason, to get around, to circumvent. Because in essence, that's what this guy was trying to do. He's trying to get around and trying to excuse his behaviors and justify. And I think before we ever talk about trauma, I think we have to think about if there's been religious inputs in our life such that we tend to justify, excuse, try to make up a reason, try to accommodate our own ideas, our own thoughts. And when we do that, it's possible, not always happening, but it's possible that we leave trauma for other people. And I'm going to bring that to your attention because in this parable, it's the religious people that participated indirectly with trauma. And I want us to be careful that following Jesus isn't a religious experience. Following Jesus is a relationship. And that's why I think the whole question of love, it's grounded in relationship. And that's what Jesus does when he's discussing this whole scenario with this religious leader, is he's grounding everything in love. And when you see this parable, we're going to talk about it over the next couple weeks. When you see this parable, it's not only Jesus answering the question, who's my neighbor? But I also think that Jesus is demonstrating what is love. What does genuine love look like? And not just for people who are pretty and nice and convenient and easy to love, but somebody that's not as easily lovable. So these are questions for you to think about, and I want you to consider, what is a trauma, recent trauma in your life? Just answer that now. And of course, I want to thank you for subscribing. Hit the notification bell right there, because we'll keep you posted on content when we bring it up next time. And I think this series will be really, really interesting to you and helpful to you. So share it with your friends, neighbors. Trauma drama, because God's got some answers to help us with trauma. Thanks so much.